two, three. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I ever get back. Oh, it's root for the Cubbies. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. Hey!
This is
the Monday Morning Quarterback on the 11th of November, 2009, beaming from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. Evidently, according to the corporation or enterprise SpaceX, they've sent up numerous satellites, and we will be beaming from space. What their objective is to provide high-speed internet service to parts of the world that are not receiving it. We'll have more on the open source report, which we've been working on. We'll get that out in the first few days of this week. Nonetheless, we have an interesting program here. We actually are quarterbacking two of the talk shows. One is the State of the Union, that is on CNN. The guest there is Amy Klobuchar. She's talking about the state of the Democratic contest for 2020, the entrance of Mr. Bloomberg, the former three-term mayor of New York, and also the sexism involved in the selection process of candidates and how the corporate media covers that particular instance. And she gives an example, the mayor from South Bend, who's a mayor of a very small municipality, not a major city, has no legislative experience at all, has some administrative experience. He was at Deloitte at one time, and he is backed by the people at Facebook. So he's known as not only Little Pete, but Mayor Pete. He is the Facebook person in there. So the race is getting more differentiated as we move along. As Amy Klobuchar says, she has endorsements on the ground in Iowa, the establishment there, which that can be good and cannot be good. It depends. And she's opened more offices in Iowa, so she's taking Iowa seriously, and Iowa evidently is taking her more seriously. We'll be watching the polls there to see what happens. Now, with these so-called liberal candidates, middle-of-the-road candidates, whatever you want to call them, her objective, obviously, is to clear some of those people out of the way. Now, Bloomberg, what will he do to Joe Lunchbox Biden is a very big question. Biden, a traditional liberal, the darling of some of the same people Amy Klobuchar's after, these local officials in the Iowa and New Hampshires of the world, in South Carolina, etc. That is a very tenuous situation because he's having problems raising money. And we'll look and see how the hearings on the affair in Ukraine, the telephone the telephone conversation, it was a contest with the new President Zelensky there. And when we look at that and how it affects the polling, now the nation is pretty much split on the whole process of impeachment. And what we're looking to see, does that needle move? It only needs to move a few points there, and also the ratings of DJ Trump. How that, some of them have him basically where he's been, high 44%, 45%, low 41, 39. Does that go below the magic number of 40 or 39? We'll be looking at to see how his popularity is, and of course also Joe Lunchbox Biden. He's going to drop some points. He was already dropping to start with before the Ukraine affair entered into it. His electability, that's something we'll hear more and more about. But we have those states that are basically outliners. When you look at Iowa, it's a state that's almost 100% European. It's basically a rural state, not typical of the U.S. as a whole, and also has an older population there. And then you go to New Hampshire. But as you move on to cities that are much more diverse, such as Las Vegas, I don't count in that diversity as South Carolina on the Face the Nation part that you hear from us at the end. There's one of the strategies there for the Democratic Party is talking about the impact of fallout of O.J. Simpson in South Carolina. No doubt that is a large percentage of the party, Democratic Party, in South Carolina. It is the home state of Representative Clyburn, who is the whip. Before that, he was, the secondary whip or something like that. So he's a party functionary, no doubt about that. But the reality is, in the state of South Carolina, the Democratic Party is the second party. The Republican Party is the party that's electing people, including an African-American named Scott. He's a senator from South Carolina. And before that, they had Haley, who has just come out with a new book. She was a UN ambassador under DJ Trump, and she's talking about people that were not necessarily loyal to DJ Trump. And she points out there General Kelly and Tillerson, the Exxon man, who left the administration. But so where is she going? Well, that's a very interesting question. A lot of that will depend on where the conservative tide goes. There's been talk of replacing old Mike Pence from Indiana with her, a younger person and a woman of color. That would not help the Republican ticket. And I'm skipping around a little bit here, but we're getting some of those things in here. And let's jump back to Bloomberg. Well, Bloomberg would be a number of millionaires, billionaires in the race. DJ Trump's a lightweight billionaire at best. It's not conclude if he's actually a billionaire, maybe just a multi-millionaire. Tied up with so much dodgy property deals and dodgy this and dodgy that. But again, you also have Tom Steyer. He's a multi-millionaire, billionaire in that situation. So there's a number of those. Bernie Sanders spoke on that. That is not really what we need. So where will Bloomberg go within this Democratic Party lineup? He has to go to the center, a slightly right of center. He's known for gun controlled efforts and also on the environment. The environment plays to the liberal and progressive center of the party, but at the same time, it's not a high issue in various polls. If you look at them, it's not one of the basic issues that people are that excited about. And there are already environmental people out there. So you had the the governor from Washington State, Inslee. He was going to be the environmental candidate. Of course, he has dropped out. Now, Bloomberg is different. He's going to skip some states, and the reason he's skipping those states is it doesn't really make sense for him to get into Iowa. I don't know if it's past the deadline in Iowa and New Hampshire yet or not, but he's going to take some time and mount his campaign and literally see how many dominoes fall between New Hampshire and Iowa and New Hampshire. There's usually 3 or 4 plane tickets out of New Hampshire, and the way that it goes there, and we've been looking at that for a very long time, where those are. A couple of those candidates need to get a ticket out of there, and Amy Klobuchar is one, so she needs to come in 3rd or 4th in Iowa. And we'll see where Biden is now. If Liz Warren or Bernie in Iowa come in 1st or 2nd or 2nd and 1st, whatever, it depends on who comes in 3rd. There's some people that say perhaps old Joe Lunchbox Biden could come in 4th or 5th. If he does that, he's going to have problems in New Hampshire, and he'll be out of the ball game after leaving New Hampshire if he lasts that long. That's the problem with him. And who comes into his present space? Would it be somebody that is a liberal like Amy Klobuchar? Would it be this Mayor Pete? That's why you're going to see more attacks on him than you previously saw. Will it be one of the others there? Perhaps, and don't think he's in the next debate. Senator Booker of New Jersey. And where does that leave Kamala Harris, who could literally be run out of California? What kind of commodity, I hate to use that word, would Kamala Harris be in this whole scenario? She's been sort of forgotten about and passed by. And part of the reason there is a number of candidates that occupy the progressive state. She was involved in a race we covered in San Francisco, the DA there. And don't have it up here, but anyway, the progressive candidate won in San Francisco that was not endorsed by Kamala Harris or Dianne Feinstein. Even the mayor, Breed there, she didn't endorse it. They endorsed the losing candidate. The winner was Boudin. Now, Boudin is a progressive. His parents were members of the Weber Underground, and his father's still in jail. Now, I think he's serving a life prison sentence. Bernadette Boudin, used to see her at the post office all the time. She is out of prison now, his mother. And it's interesting, he went to law school and was the deputy public defender in San Francisco. Now he will be the DA. And we've had several areas that has happened. Kim Fox, I can think of in Chicago there, and the gentleman in St. Louis that was active in Ferguson, and his name right now. And then we have, of course, in Boston. So in other words, there's a number of those progressive type DAs that are coming on board, and you're starting to see that at the local grassroots level. And then if you add to that, while we're looking at the national roundup here, all politics being local, etc., we see the race. We're going to that in just a second here. In Louisiana, they had early voting there, and we're appreciative here of JMC Analytics and JMC Enterprise. We'll go to them in just a second here, as soon as I finish our little introductory here. Anyway, that is where American politics stands. And one other thing, you'll hear these hearings, and because most people, unless they listen by radio, etc., won't get to the full testimony of these people that'll be live, unless they're at home and not working or whatever. They can watch it on television. It'll be on the various channels, streamed live, and there will be edited versions of it where it's diced up. What the media determines the important situation. I'm not certain how we'll cover this at WBRN, because usually when things are covered by the mass media, Jerry and I used to have a policy that sometimes we would not cover it. We wait a day till the dust settled and get into the transcripts of what they actually said. Now, they had the depositions or the closed-door hearings to get into that, but that does consume a lot of our time. So we have to think about that. Let's go to some of the international things that have happened. The people have been in the streets in Chile, and now they're moving to get a new constitution. They've had a socialist in there as president 2 times, Michelle Bachelet. But now this Pinochet right-wing constitution that came out of the 70s, they will rewrite it. And also in a defeat for the socialist movement, Evo Morales in Bolivia resigned. He was forced out, as we'd say in the U.S. here, forced out of office in what could be a coup d'etat without the military actually taking it over. What happened was they had an election there, and the election was stopped a day or two. The appearance looked dodgy. Now, I don't know if there was any dodgy activity there or not, but the right-wing forces were able to get enough people in the streets, because a lot of Morales' supporters were in the countryside. He's an indigenous person, the first indigenous person elected in Bolivia. And Bolivia, from a historic standpoint, was where Che Guevara was killed by, no doubt, some of the same reactionaries that overthrew Evo Morales. And the injury to some of his supporters, his sister had her house burnt down. The other things that happened to the working class in various cities there, in Santa Cruz. But one of the things I did see in La Paz, the capital, the people, most of the people in the streets, at least what you could see, appeared to be middle-class people. Now, the economy in Brazil in Bolivia has been going very well for most countries in the so-called that part of the Americas. So thus what happens is you create a larger middle class and expand the middle class, but also for working people in terms of healthcare, education, those things. Under about 13 years of Evo Morales, people were able to come out of abject poverty. Now the opposition, how it can get itself back together again, and the key was when the military, who said they were going to stay out of it, they called for him to resign, and he had no choice because the people that were guarding the presidential palace there were left their post basically. And there was a little presidential guard, I suppose, around, but that was inadequate. And the other day, his helicopter almost crashed. So in other words, they were going to physically throw him out of there, or they were going to kill him. I mean, that's what it got down to. And the supporters, we'll just look to see how these elections come out with this right-winger that had once been into presidential politics, but no doubt is very corrupt. And one of the first acts there is the Venezuelan government talking about their delegates or their staff leaving Bolivia. So and it's a very small nation. I think under 10 million, 6 million, or something like that. Anyway, we've probably touched upon most of the international situation. Beyond the world, we'll have the Bolivian case. We're behind in everything here, so let's get on with it. Out of state Louisiana, JMC Analytics. This is a decision 2019 conclusion of runoff in person early voting in Louisiana. This is on the 10th of November 2019. In-person early voting concluded last night. Mail-in absentee can still be accepted up till the day before Election Day. It broke some records. What did 7 days of runoff of early voters tell us? Well, it was a strong turnout. As of last night, 489,649 Louisianans either voted early by person or by mail-in ballot, and that was 451,171 in person and 38,478 mail-in ballots. To put this number in perspective, this is the highest early voting turnout ever for a non-presidential election. Not only did it exceed the volume of in-person voting for the primary, that was 31%, or 115,459, but it was 91%, or 232,628 higher than day in-person early voting in the 2015 runoff. But it was, the top 5 by early voting volume. Early voting parishes were East Baton Rouge, that was 58,249 early absentee ballots. New Orleans, 39,260. Saint Tame, 35,097. Jefferson, 31,523. Oscotia, or whatever, 20,088.54. Now, the Democratic, whatever the turnout levels are for the election cycle to election cycle, African American voters are almost unanimously Democratic. They tend to show up in greater numbers on the last day, but very rarely do they turn out to the extent they did yesterday. A whopping 40% of last day early voters were African Americans. African Americans represent 31% of Louisiana registered voters. As further illustrating how unprecedented the African American participation, this is strong, and in the 116 days of available data for in-person early voting going back to 2008, only 4 times has the African American early vote as a percentage of the total vote ever hit higher than 40%. 3 of those times were in 2008 when Barack Obama was first elected. The 40% African-American electorate was added to stronger and relative to the primary African-American early voting for the previous 6 days, which never dropped below 29%. This means that the final early voting is 31% African-American, a figure 6% higher percentage-wise than in the primary and 1% higher than in the runoff in 2015. Does this 6% increase in African-American share of early voting electorate equate to similar 6-point boost for the Governor Edwards? Because at the same time that the African-American share of electorate increased 6% relative to the primary, Republican share only decreased 3%. It was 38% compared to 41% in the primary. The remainder of the decrease came from a lower turnout percentage-wise from European Democrats and European independents, since Governor Edwards has been running strong among European Democrats, 60 to 37 in the last JMC poll conducted, and publicly released relatively well among independent Europeans. He tallied 36 to 56 in the last poll, and an incremental benefit to his campaign isn't as much as it would seem, because Republicans' percentage of the electorate remained relatively high, and amongst these groups, Governor Edwards trails 17 to 79%. While this analysis means in practical terms is that because the decrease in European Democrat independents, the relative high Republican early voting, and Edwards' poll of 50 to 49 over Raspon, I suppose, would become 50 to 46 Edwards Raspon if the polling results were recalculated to reflect the demographic composition of the early vote. Projecting turnout is a constantly moving target throughout early voting. This would apply to many races, but since early voting has been in existence in Louisiana for over a decade, 10 years, JMC has established and continues redefined benchmarks that it could use to predict early voting or final turnout, even considering that the predictive model got slightly more complex starting in 2017 with mail-in. Oregon uses it. Many states are starting to use mail-in here, starting to be automatically being mailed out to those 65 and older who opt to be on the list. Given the above, as well as the fact that early voting twice has shattered numerical records this cycle for non-presidential early voting, there are 3 parallel universe to JMC's turnout predictions, which we consider the fact that it's an estimated 10,000 absentee ballots have yet to be mailed in and tallied before the Friday deadline. Which one of these being the likely outcome? The parallel universe 1. The October primary, 38% of the total vote was cast before election day, which was in itself a record. If you want to assume that the higher early vote turnout relative to October primary is indicative only of a surge in election day turnout, 28% early voting is equated to a 60% voter turnout. A total vote of 1.78 million, because this is a presidential level turnout. Louisiana's presidential turnout in the last 3 presidential elections was 68%, and 67%. JMC doesn't see this as a realistic scenario. Parallel universe 2. If instead we want to assume that the higher early voting turnout is solely indicative of front-loading the total votes with no increase in numerical turnout relative to the October 2019 primary. The turnout there was 1,000,036. An estimated 499,000 earlier voters are 489 who have already voted early, plus an estimated 10,000 absentee ballots yet to be mailed in, represents an early vote that is 37% of the total primary vote, it would be a logical stretch to think that early voting, which is slow but surely becoming more popular, would jump from 28 to 38 a month. Again, it's not a realistic scenario at all. Parallel universe 3. More realistically, there will likely be a combination of early turnout and some increased interest in early voting. In other words, and early voting represents 33% of the total, 33% being halfway between 28 and 37, which calculates to a total turnout of 51%, or 1.51 million voters. In fact, this scenario was what happened in the primary. JMC used similar reasoning to project a 48% turnout. That was early voting of 27% total, and the actual number ended up being a turnout of 46%. Underperformed a little there, with 28% of that vote being cast the day before the election. Conclusion. Why does early voting matter? When the legislature essentially established no-frills early voting more than a decade ago, you have a noticeable constituency of people who prefer convenience voting. That also was in Arizona. They call it convenience voting there. This constituency has, for 9 times in a row, the 2015 primary, the 2015 runoff, the 2016 presidential election, December 2016 runoff, the October 2017 primary, the November 2017 runoff, the primary in 2018, December 28. This is the jungle primary here, and the October primary exceeded 20%. A politician would be foolish, to ignore this upfront vote, especially in a closely contested race. Also, 2 early voting numbers are the first ones that are typically reported after the polls close at 8 p.m. Central Time in New Orleans. I believe it's Central. How they are. Anyway, that is that particular setup. Let's jump around here a little bit because we have the talk show afterwards. So I'm going to stop this. Let's go with a little bit of sport here. And we incidentally, on the channel here, we have a Numbers Man. That is our macroeconomics program, known as the Numbers Man Show. That will be coming up very shortly, the same date probably. They'll probably be both published there. Anyway, a little bit of sports. Dodgers, this is from the Los Angeles Times. Shop for starting pitching, right-hand power as off-season begins. Yeah, no doubt about that. They have a pitcher here of, who is it? You got this pitcher here. Jock. He hit 36 home runs in 2019 for the Dodgers, but could be on a trading block. The reason for the latest disappointments were dissected and analyzed. The manager was criticized, players were blamed, the front office was questioned, but there's no obvious rotation need for the team that compiles 106 wins, setting a record for one of the marquee franchises. The holes are there. Overall, is it necessary for after 7 consecutive trips to the postseason? This does not mean change isn't coming this off season. The Dodgers could use all of the above, and they're talking to a general manager meeting that'll be in Scottsdale, Arizona. Frontline starting pitching to take place along emerging ace Walter Buehler, another right-hand power hitter. Free agent market is there. They have Garrett Coles, the starting pitching. And, of course, Steven Strasburg, disgraced pitcher with the Nationals there, that came out in support of President Trump. The free agent market, the expectation is Strasburg will resign with the Nationals, but Cole is an Orange County native and a UCLA product, and he doesn't hold the same allegiance to the Astros. He'll get more money there anyway. And the third baseman, Anthony Rendon and Josh Donaldson, both elite right-hand hitters, headline the core position players in free agency. Rendon is 29. The Dodgers would pounce on the opportunity to sign him to a short deal. I think 4 or 5 years if available. Donaldson, meanwhile, turns 34. He has a shorter deal if he climbs 237 home runs. That's .900 on base slugging percentage on a 1-year contract with Atlanta. So the other teams out here, Dodgers operated the off season. It could depend on their willingness to spend significant money. They have it there. A soft cap bet has hardened not only in L.A. but in big markets in recent years, and they cite the Chicago Cubs, Boston Red Sox, and Yankees will pay a tax for the 2019 season. Okay, despite playing in the second largest market in the country, drawing the highest attendance in the majors, the last 7 seasons, securing their TV contract that pays the organization a staggering $8.35 billion over 25 years. The Dodgers have not surpassed the line since 2017. A document prepared for potential investors before 2017 planned to keep the Dodgers payroll below the threshold for at least 2021 after they pay the luxury tax for each of the first 6 seasons there. Anyway. So we'll see how that goes. The Dodgers have 5 players that would become free agents last week with $60.7 million came off the books against the competitive balance tax. This is where we start talking about this tax. We'll do a little more of this on All About Sports. They must give raises to several players eligible for arbitration. That's Cody Bellinger and Ulan Uris, who qualify for Super 2 status, whatever that is. Bellinger is projected to make $11.6 million in his first year of arbitration, according to Major League Baseball trade rumors, after earning $605,000 in 2019. Uris made $519,000 in 2 nines, projected to make 1.7 through his arbitration. And this is Jock Peterson here, who is projected to make $8.5 million in his final year of arbitration before becoming a free agent. He's only 27 years old. Was on the market last year, but Dodgers kept him, and he hit a career of 36 home runs. Not bad at all. Ryu will attract. He's one of 5. Will attract significant contract this winter. David Freese announced his retirement. The team declined $13 million for several players. Rich Hill, Russell Martin will drop into the market for deep pay cut. 32 gambled on himself last year when he took a 1-year $17.9 million qualifying offer and bypassed the chance to score a multi-year contract. He's a finalist for the National League Cy Young. That'll put more money in his pocket. Injuries lingered, but he logged his biggest workload since 2013. Ryu is a high ceiling, low flow, second tier option in his free agency. Team that strikes out on Cole Strasburg aren't interested in giving huge contracts to Iowa Ace, and could turn to Ryu as one of the things. Anyway, this is from the LA Times here, and where they are in their scenario. Let me just move along here and see where exactly where we are. Do I just shop around? We did have E.J. Dion. We're going to have to save him for a later broadcast here. We'll do a paragraph of E.J. here. This is to the Washington Post. We usually have them on, but Democrats have put their... just a minute here. This goes in with our Amy Klobuchar piece. Democrats have put their differences above beating Trump. Bloomberg isn't a symptom, is a symptom, not a cure. This is, I believe, E.J. Dion here. A.J. Dion Jr. A broad coalition now exists to throw Trump out of the office. Every day he reminds America why the country would be much better off without him. Which makes you wonder Are Democrats determined to shed themselves into irreconcilable factions? Will they allow this utterly corrupt and unfit person to lose the popular vote by even more than in 2/6, but streak out a victory by gaming the Electoral College? Democratic presidential candidates are now doing a bang-up job suggesting that their differences matter more than defeating Trump. Former Mayor Bloomberg has entered the contest. It won't help. Let's let it be said that despite serious blind spots, Bloomberg was very good and on many fronts broadly a progressive mayor. He deserves our thanks for using his wealth to financing gun control thing, more or less a one-candidate deal. He also had the soda tax out in Chicago. Anyway, but it's hard to see his winning a lot of Democratic primaries, not just because he turned himself into a temporary Republican to get to the city hall, because in New York he ran as a Republican, Independent, and then a Democrat. Switched around. Doesn't matter. He sharpened the class and ideological divisions in the Democratic electorate. Moreover, somewhere on the 7th, the phony populist Trump is laughing. On one side of the Democratic Party is denouncing its foe as a class enemy and apologist of the rich, which he is. And the others argue the champion of the left would destroy the American economy. Bloomberg might use forcefully notice that two candidates most elated by the prospects of his candidacy are Bernie Sanders and Liz Warren. Multi-billionaires are fold for Warren and Sanders. Warren supporters are understandably angry over how the party's Wall Street wing has recently sharpened its knives against her. Yeah, that's becoming in what Amy has did there, denouncing Mayor Pippin. In fact, the wealth tax underscores how much money is concentrated at the top of our economy. Warren is asking why the wealth of so many middle-class Americans are already taxed. Homes are their biggest net asset. Their real estate tax each year, while holding the very rich often never face a levy. Perhaps her wealth tax will need to be reconfigured to form a high tax on capital gains. Needlessly, she's already transformed our thinking there. Medicare for all is simply helpful, putting fundamental change in the system, making it clear how moderate Obamacare is by comparison. But my Post colleague, this is Ruth Marcus and Catherine Rampell, point out last week Warren's historic effort to explain how it would work highlights its vulnerability to both substance and political attacks. Democrats have the high ground on the Medicare now. In Kentucky, Andy Beshear demonstrated that even Trump voters want to save a bill on the Affordable Care Act. Why throw away the advantage? DJ On is a typical liberal here when it comes to the former Joe Biden. Petey, Bloomberg's action could be seen as a vote of no confidence. It's true that Biden, we should say, hasn't lived up to hopes of his supporters. Buttigieg has yet to solve his problem with the falls of O.J. Simpson, the African-American community. But Bloomberg's support, and this is very important here, for stop and frisk will hardly make him popular than Petey amongst African-American voters or followers of O.J. Simpson. The poll also suggested in South Carolina and Nevada, the states that vote after Iowa and New Hampshire, where Biden is in trouble, the former vice president is hanging on, and in the meantime, Buttigieg is surging in Iowa. He isn't surging very much. Bloomberg could be the spoiler for the candidate he is closest ideological to. The large issue: Democrats need a leader who can remind progressives and moderates that they have far more in common than the current stripe would suggest. That these competing camps agree on the urgency of ousting Trump, but also on health care insurance to everyone, and moving forcefully on climate change, and acting humanely on immigration, defending civil rights and voting rights. The person who rises to the task of pulling these sides together will deserve the nomination. Will one of these candidates ever audition for the pot? C.J. Dion Jr. That's very interesting. Well, on the State of the Nation, Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota was auditioning for the pot. Bernie was denouncing Bloomberg, and it'll be a hell of a fight when Bloomberg finally appears at a debate. But that will not happen probably soon here. I'm not sure if he'll be on the November 20th. That one will be in Atlanta, Georgia, at the studios of, what's his name there? Anyway, he's the only African-American studio around as far as the studio is concerned in Atlanta. DJ Trump was at the Georgia Dome, or what it's called, opening his thing for African Americans who support Trump. There were a few of them that were paid, and they showed up. So so that's basically where that support is. It's not rising, but we do some polling, about 7% there of the people. And one other thing here, and I'll finish this up. We do, in fact, have African Americans that did not vote in the last election. Some of those skipped it, and I'm talking more about the 2012 election, the last one that Barack Obama ran. That these people that had grievances about Barack Obama, what did he do for us? And they didn't vote in 2016. And they went into various dodgy activities like conspiracy theories, ultra-nationalism that has nothing to do with day-to-day survival of African American people. Those people, if they register to vote or are registered to vote, they would be the ones that would be more likely to vote for DJ Trump. Polling after polling has done that. Nonetheless, this is Boston Red in the Jared Pippin broadcast booth on the 11th of November 2019, Veterans Day. Happy Veterans Day to the veterans out there that have been in various wars, including the Great Patriotic War. I don't think we have any World War I veterans around anymore. This was the war to end all wars, and then we had conflicts in Vietnam, and then lesser wars that went after that. So at least one thing we can cheer is to get Wilsonian foreign policy, which has been championed by both parties. The Democrats ran it forever, and they're still trying to find a Russian menace out there, although the USSR is gone. They're still there, so this is what allows, like what happened in Bolivia, the same forces are there. And Bernie Sanders have pointed out that more than any other candidate in this race, that it's not DJ Trump, it is capitalism that is the problem, period. So whatever candidates do to work towards that, it is good. And what happened out in Seattle, the debacle, we covered that on a Friday Jobber, with the progressive candidate Shawana, and Microsoft spent over $1 million trying to defeat her. They failed in doing that. They got a business-friendly candidate out there who was the organizer of the Pride Parade to split up the progressive vote, and it didn't happen. So that is one of the things that's happened to Amazon. This is a very long struggle, as President Obama said. It would not only take another president, but it would take several presidents to get the progressive agenda where it should be. Good day, and have a good week.
To the race, he's apparently concerned about the strength of the current field of Democrats. Joining me now to discuss, Senator Amy Klobuchar, who is now qualified for the next two Democratic debates. She's also a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator Klobuchar, thanks so much. Congratulations on making the debate stages. We have a lot to get to.
Thanks, Jake.
I want to ask you about impeachment. House Republicans are asking to call many of their own witnesses, including Hunter Biden, to testify in the impeachment probe. Would you be okay with Hunter Biden testifying?
Something to be proud of. Adam Schiff has said this best, and that's what this is all about, which was a sham investigation that the president was trying to push. And for now, the House is simply gathering relevant evidence about what the president did. That is what this is about. I know they also want to try to get the whistleblower to testify, when in fact all sources tell us that what the whistleblower said was secondhand information, and they now have firsthand information of diplomats, military people, others that actually heard these actions occur, where the president was pushing for Ukraine to start an investigation against his political opponents in exchange for military assistance. That is what all of this mounting evidence is showing, and that is why I would agree with Adam Schiff. Why would you reveal the whistleblower when you're supposed to have protections, which Republican Senator Grassley has vehemently argued for, protections for this whistleblower?
So that's a no on Hunter Biden?
I see no reason why you would have Hunter Biden testify when, from what all the reports that we've seen, is this wasn't a valid investigation. It was something where the president was messing around to try to get information against a political opponent.
Let's turn to the latest in the 2020 race. Former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg filed to run in the 2020 primary election in Alabama, the first state with a filing deadline. The mayor seems to be concerned, according to his aides, that Senators Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders are too liberal to beat Trump and that the moderate candidates, such as yourself, are not strong enough to win the nomination. Is his analysis incorrect?
Yes, very incorrect. First of all, I'm gaining momentum all the time. We're doubling our offices in Iowa. We got an extraordinary amount of help after that last debate, raising $2.1 million at amyklobuchar.com in just 6 days. And so we are building an operation that can win. And I have the most endorsements of anyone in Iowa, of any of the candidates. Stepping back to this assertion from his spokesperson, I have seen a lot of excitement about all of our candidates. I think all of them have served our country in one way or another. And when people look at the White House and they see this multimillionaire, including, by the way, independents, moderate Republicans, and how he's messing up so many things, I don't think they say, oh, we need someone richer. I don't think that, Jake. I think you have to earn votes and not buy them. And I certainly welcome Mayor Bloomberg to the race. He has done incredible work on gun safety, on environmental issues, and it is work of merit. But I don't think you just waltz in and say, instead of, well, I'm good enough to be president, your argument is the other people aren't good enough. That is not how we've been conducting these debates. We're having legitimate debates about who's the strongest person. I think I have the strongest argument, being from the heartland, the place that we need to win, being the one that has won every red and purple congressional district over and over again, and someone who can govern from strength and someone who's gotten through the gridlock of Washington. I'm looking forward to debating Mayor Bloomberg about that. But not if he just comes in and his whole purpose is to say the rest of the field isn't good enough.
Two new recent polls have shown that the moderate candidate who appears to be breaking into the top tier in Iowa is actually South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Recent comments in the New York Times suggest that you don't believe that Mayor Buttigieg is qualified to be the president. Am I reading that wrong?
Yes, I don't think I want to dwell on various press articles, but I'll say this. I think any of the candidates that were on that debate stage were more qualified than the president of the United States right now. So
well, that's more qualified, more qualified than
Mayor
Trump.
Pete,
do you think Buttigieg is qualified, period?
Yes.
Okay.
But let me explain why I think I am the better candidate. And by the way, we get asked this all the time. Welcome to politics. And that's what was in that article. Various candidates get asked about each other all the time. And I made what I think was a cogent case. And that is that I'm the one from the Midwest that's actually won in a statewide race over and over again, including bringing in those voters that just voted in Kentucky, those kind of voters, just voted in Virginia, brought them over the edge so that we had strong leaders that were able to win those elections. Those are the kind of voters I've won. And that's not true of Mayor Pete. That's just a fact.
Right.
I also am someone that has passed multiple bills as the lead Democrat, important bills in Washington, D.C. He's had a different experience. We should be able to have those debates about candidates without being accused of being negative. All this is are questions were asked. And the last point I made in that article was that of the women on the stage, I'm focusing here on my fellow women senators, of Senator Harris, Senator Warren, and myself. Do I think that we would be standing on that stage if we had the experience that he had? No, I don't. Maybe we're held to a different standard. But my goal here is to get the best candidate to lead the ticket. I believe that's me. That is why I have been able to attract the kind of support that I have in the early states. And I am doing this the right way, running a grassroots campaign.
Senator, your 2020 opponents, former Vice President Joe Biden and Senator Elizabeth Warren, are feuding, I think it's fair to say, after Biden said that the way Warren is pushing for Medicare for all is, quote, elitist. Do you agree that the way she pushes her plans and suggests that her plan is the right one and Joe Biden should run in a different primary if he's going to repeat Republican talking points, do you agree that this is elitist?
Okay, let me separate these things. I don't think Elizabeth Warren is elitist. I don't think that. That is not the adjective I would use to describe her in any way. I think she's pushing for a policy that I don't agree with and would kick 149 million Americans off of their health care in just 4 years, their current health care. That is a fact. It says it on page 8 of the bill, of the Sanders-Warren bill. That being said, I think there's a better way with one big, bold idea, and that is by having a competitive nonprofit option that can compete with the insurance companies and bring the prices down. I also think that we need to take on the pharmaceutical companies in a big way, work that I have done with Senator Sanders. And that means bringing in less expensive drugs from other countries. That means allowing and unleashing Medicare to negotiate and getting rid of that prohibition that says they can't. I lead that bill, and I will get that done as president. And it also means looking at the House proposal, which is a great one, to put a cap on some of these prices and save taxpayers $350 billion. Those are bold ideas, Jake. And there is no monopoly on good ideas. And that's the point I would make about Senator Warren's and Senator Sanders' proposals. I would not call them elitist.
Well, Warren and Sanders aren't here, but they would say those individuals would be kicked off private insurance, but then would be covered by the government health care, Medicare for all. Thank you so much, Senator Klobuchar. We appreciate your time as always.
It was great to be on. Thanks, Jake.
President Trump has a new defense for his administration.
Reacting to this, it's almost with a shrug of the shoulders. We saw these transcripts come out. If you spent time reading the 2,000 plus pages of the transcripts, tremendously damaging to the argument that Republicans have made for the past 6 weeks in defense of the president. One by one, you saw all of these defenses of the president on substance fall away, where it's clear that there was this quid pro quo that Democrats and others have been alleging. Republicans don't have an answer for it, as I think was evident in your interview with Senator Kennedy.
He said it depends on the kind of quid pro quo.
Yeah, I mean, he sketched out this scenario where he had, on the one hand, the president might have been doing this because he has some vague interest in corruption broadly. But you have to take a step back and think about what that means. I mean, this is a president who has had friendly relations with leaders of tremendously corrupt countries, whether you're talking about Egypt or Russia or Saudi Arabia or Turkey, who wants to bring troops home, who's an America firster. But he suddenly had such an interest in corruption in this one country, in Ukraine, that he sent his personal attorney to conduct investigations that happened to overlap, coincidentally, with the interests, his political interests, in that they were investigating two of his chief political rivals. It doesn't even pass the laugh test.
So, Margaret, why then is that not more clear to the public? If it's so clear, as Stephen laid out there, is it that what these public hearings will change?
Well, the public hearings can only change people's minds if people watch the public hearings and are engaged in them or read about them. And I think it's pretty clear from the early weeks of this that President Trump's base is not shaken or thwarted by this. And so really the issue is the group we're going to be hearing a lot about in the next several months, which is the suburban voters, right? These are if you call them moderate voters or swing voters or suburban voters, somewhere in that circle is this group of people. We saw the relevance of suburban voters in Virginia in the elections, perhaps to some extent in Kentucky, and this is the group that both Democrats and President Trump are now going to be fighting for, because they are the people who are engaged in, in sort of the daily business that involves paying attention to more details like this. And they are the people who are most likely to be at a workstation at work with the TV on, absorbing the contents of this, trying to figure out whether they are uncomfortable enough about it that they won't vote for President Trump twice.
Antoine, how do Democrats avoid what happened with the Robert Mueller hearings, where there was this big buildup and the idea that if he testifies publicly, he'll describe in vivid detail what people didn't bother to read in print? How is this going to be different?
I think we have to first come to the realization that Donald Trump and his disciples have no interest in having a relationship with the truth, regardless of whether it's public or whether they actually read it and can see it. Number two, I think Democrats have to block and tackle, block out this arguments or this distraction that the Republicans want to draw them into, and really tackle the issues that matter to the American people, while they also pass legislation that they promised the American people in 2018 and remind people that it's the Senate is the holdup, is the problem, and everything goes to McConnell's graveyard to die. If we fail to do that, we will be sentenced again to 2 years in the hard time as the minority party.
Do you think it's going well?
It's hard to say. Look, here's what I do know. The Republicans demonstrated what I believe to be a political pump fake about transparency during this process when you had 47 and 48 members of their conference a part of these hearings. Now they're public, and you have leaders like Senator Graham and others who want to press the ignore button on the fact they're going to be transparent. And essentially they're saying, regardless of what comes out, no matter who says it, like a decorated military official, it's not true because it's anti-Donald Trump. And we've seen this movie before, and that's why I think Democrats have to stay focused on the things that matter outside the bubble.
Jeffrey, who's actually winning on the messaging here and convincing the American public? Because that's what these public hearings are going to be focused on.
I think it's actually, this sounds very journalistic, but I think it's too early to tell. We don't know what dynamic we enter when we actually see these people live in front of the cameras and how many people are watching and how convincing it is. I mean, on the one hand, we'll know the answer to that question, I think. Not so much, I mean, we'll know it when we see what people in the suburbs feel about it. We'll also really know the answer if we see Republicans become less cohesive. If there's one person with influence in the Republican Party on the Hill who says, you know what, the emperor really doesn't have his clothes on, that could sort of break this open a little bit, because all of us, I think, up here talk to Republicans on the Hill who privately say this is a disaster, a moral disaster, a political disaster, an ethical disaster, and they're just holding on, and they're coming up with these talking points that you saw on your show today. But there's a belief, and maybe this is an over-optimistic belief on the part of Trump's opponents, that there are people there who will say enough is enough. When they hear it from, as you say, a decorated war veteran, this is actually what happened. When they hear it from serious professionals from the State Department, they might just say enough.
But Margaret, here's the one thing Democrats and Republicans agree on, the interests of national security. And I think if Democrats use that as their North Star or their foundation about this being about national security and the future of this country, I think that is the point that no one can argue.
Well, in the meantime, the split screen will be these hearings happening in Capitol Hill while the president is meeting with another world leader that he is dealing with national security. I was pressing, Jeffrey, the National Security Advisor, on why Turkey's leader deserves the honor of walking into the White House. And after listing all of the things that Turkey has done wrong.
Right. And as you know, there's a hope in Washington that Erdogan leaves without having his bodyguards beat up people. As happened the last time. We have lower standards for this visit than we usually have. We're just like, let's not have street violence associated with this visit. No, the reception of Erdogan this week doesn't make any sense from a national security perspective. Are you rewarding? Remember, we always talk about rewarding people with an Oval Office visit. Is this the person who deserves an Oval Office visit? No, of course not. But nothing is particularly coherent in our national security strategy right now. So it makes as much sense as anything else in this kind of topsy-turvy world in which we live.
You were referring to in 2017 when American protesters were beaten up. There are U.S. Marshals arrest warrants out for some of Turkey's, the Erdogan's bodyguards. Right. We'll see if they show up on this visit. We'll be back in a moment with a lot more from our panel. Don't go away. He get into this 2020 race and that it might be a good idea. Should Democrats be skeptical of that somewhat endorsement?
Sounds like a trick.
It is a little trick. Look, I think Democrats probably should be skeptical of Michael Bloomberg for a number of reasons, most especially because he's done this before. I mean, we've had how many head fakes from Michael Bloomberg, and he's also, he was Democrat, Republican, Independent. He sort of covered the gamut. And I think you're hearing this from people like Elizabeth Warren, people like Bernie Sanders, who I think are more in touch with the sort of base of the Democratic Party, that this is not the Democratic savior that people think.
But is he the kind of candidate who could convince Republicans to cross over and vote for him?
Well, I think conceivably, he certainly has some nanny state aspects to him that I think would make conservatives uncomfortable. But I think the immediate impact is much likely to have the opposite effect, where he dilutes support potentially for Joe Biden. He could block a path forward for others who are running in the so-called moderate lane, like Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, and others. So I think if you're Elizabeth Warren today and you see Michael Bloomberg getting in, you're happy.
Antoine, being a self-made billionaire, successful business person, you can look at that and say it's the American dream. Or you can look at that and say, this person is suspect. And it seems that this person is suspect is what we're hearing more on the campaign trail. And that isn't comfortable for everyone.
I'm not going to criticize him for making money. But let me say 4 things about Bloomberg. Number one, most people will agree that the political highway is experiencing a traffic jam because we have too many people running for president on our side, and most of the lanes are filled at this point. The second point is that it's Sunday morning, so I'll say this. There's a political scripture that I reference. It says the road to heaven in the White House runs through South Carolina. Well, he has agreed that he will not participate in the South Carolina primary, where 61% of the people who will cast their vote will be African American, 55% women. Most of the states that follow reflect South Carolina. South Carolina was a launch pad for Barack Obama and a safe haven for Hillary Clinton.
Also your home state.
Oh, God's country. And then the third thing, it is the home of the most prominent and powerful African American in the U.S. Congress, Jim Clyburn. And so what Bloomberg is saying by not participating in the South Carolina primary, if he gets in, is that I have no interest in what majority of African Americans think in the South, and especially the home of Whip Jim Clyburn. That's where I think he's making a mistake, and I call it the highest act of malpractice any campaign can commit.
Wow. Margaret.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of reasons why a bid would be complicated, and I think we're not sure yet that he is going to run. There's no way to secretly check the box in Alabama without people finding out. But the case to be made, if he did pursue it, is that what he's done with his billions of dollars is invest in 2 of the most important issues to Democrats on climate change and on gun control, right? That he's got support in Wall Street, he's got some support in Silicon Valley as well, and that when you look at the results of last Tuesday's election, there may be a market of people in the general election, maybe, that would be receptive to a message like his. But, you know, there is also an overarching lesson from the 2016 race, which is that when you have a 17-way or an 18-way or a 19-way primary, somebody who did not have a chance in a 3-way race could have a chance, and that is all part of the calculus.
You cannot be the Democratic nominee without having strong, across-the-board, broad, deep, and wide support among African-American voters. He does not have that.
Jeffrey.
But I do want to say one thing in his defense, or in the theoretical defense of this candidacy. Unlike the other billionaires who are really vanity candidates, this is a proven election winner. I mean, this is a 3-time mayor of New York City.
As a Democrat, Republican, and Independent.
I mean, he's covered all the bases. So he has overcome a first hurdle. He's actually gone before voters and gotten votes, and by many accounts, had a largely successful run as mayor. So I think it does put him in a slightly different lane than just the pure vanity billionaire fast lane.
But it is the Biden lane, and it complicates that contest inextricably.
All right. Thanks to all of you for the analysis. We will be right back.